Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Garden State Debate. My name is Ryan, and today on the show we have a very special guest, Nancy Erika Smith, a well-known attorney here in the Garden State of New Jersey and partner at Smith Mullin Law Firm. But before we get into today's exciting show, a couple of quick announcements. As you hopefully know by now, our platform does not accept any funding. That means no advertising or any other source of funding for our platform. So if you enjoy listening and watching, there's a couple of simple things you can do to support our platform. You can visit our website at www.gardenstatedebate.com, and you can also go to our YouTube channel, and it would be great if you could subscribe to it by just going to youtube.com and searching Garden State Debate or clicking through to the YouTube channel via our website. And please follow us on Twitter at the handles at GS Debate Podcast or myself at RyHost, which would be very helpful. And if you haven't caught up with episodes to date, we launched in mid-September and we've had a variety of exciting discussions, including discussing the coronavirus pandemic with the Chief Medical Officer of Overlook Medical Center, Dr. Jack Audette. We've sat down with Dr. Peter Woolley, the founder of FDU Polls, to discuss polling dynamics and national polling. We've also sat down with Charlie Cradaville, the founder of the successful media outlet New Brunswick Today. And we've had on the show Michelle Sikirka, the CEO of NJBIA, to discuss BIA's role and also everything related to New Jersey's economy as we stand now. We've also had on the show New Jersey's own professional musician Jairus Cook to discuss his journey in life through his music career. And Jairus also happens to have wrote, produced, and sang the audio for the intro to Garden State Debate, which appears in the beginning of every episode of the video and audio podcast. And we thank Jairus for that. So we hope you enjoy episode 7 with attorney Nancy Erika Smith, which starts now.
Garden State Debate, where the talk is real. Garden State Debate, no joke, no frills. Yeah. Garden State Debate, it's the talk of the town. Garden State Debate, for people all around. Yeah. Garden State Debate, Garden State Debate, Garden State Debate.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Garden State Debate videocast and podcast. We're back again with a very special guest today, Miss Nancy Erika Smith, who is a partner at the widely known law firm Smith and Mullin. And I'm going to leave it up to Nancy to educate us more on the law firm's expertise, which from what I gather is regarding things around civil rights and discriminatory employment practices and things like that here in New Jersey and around the area, among other things. But Nancy and I have chatted a little bit via email, and I've done my homework, and looks like she's been a New Jersey, been around New Jersey for a while and graduated from Rutgers Law School and went on to start the law firm Smith and Mullin in 1986. And so she's been practicing law for several years and knows what she's doing. And on top of that, she's always been recognized in many different publications as being a top attorney here in New Jersey and even in larger areas such as the NJ Biz being a top 3, I think it was 3rd in 2019 for power attorney. So there's many other things that she's been awarded for her service and what she does. And we'll get into some of the stuff and some of her cases and her background, and we're excited to get into all that. So I don't want to waste any more time. So with that, I'd like to welcome you to the show. Thank you for coming on. Miss Nancy Erika Smith. We appreciate it, and just want to see how you're doing. How are you doing today? How's everything going?
Hi, Ryan. I'm doing great. Everything's good. Happy to be here in New Jersey, suffering through the pandemic in a beautiful state.
Yeah, it's been that's a good point. It's been a challenge. This is probably around the 7th or so show that we've had, and everything always comes back to the pandemic and how everyone's dealing with it, and can't complain compared to some of the other things that's going on. So hopefully you're doing well and the family's doing well and everything.
Yes, I have a son who's an emergency room doctor.
Oh, really?
We have, frontliners in the family, and we're proud of that and scared of that, but everybody's good.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. Thank you for his service, actually. But just to get into it a little bit, if you don't mind, I said a little bit about the Rutgers graduation. So do you mind just giving us a little background on how you got into your practice and what drove you to it, and kind of give us a quick and dirty version of, or as long as it takes, actually, into how you got to where you are right now.
I'm a born and bred Jersey girl. I grew up in a little town called Keyport. It's a 1 square mile, 6,000 people. My parents owned a liquor store there. I didn't know until much later that it was an unusual town because it was completely integrated. And I went to integrated schools and had totally what I thought was a normal experience of going to school and having friendships and going to parties that were integrated. And I think that formed a basis for my worldview. My dad died when I was 15. My mom and I moved to a trailer park, and I graduated from Toms River North. I am the product of an affordable public education. I went to Ocean County College. I went to Montclair State, and then I went to Rutgers Law. And the most expensive of those was Rutgers Law, $1,200 a semester. So there was a time when you could, through public education, give yourself the kind of career where you could become a professional like a lawyer. Wow. I don't think we're there anymore, unfortunately, but I'm very lucky that I had a public education. An affordable public education allowed me to virtually change class.
Absolutely. That's a good point. With $1,200 a semester, did you say?
$1,200 a year.
A year.
$600 a semester. I misspoke.
Even with
a semester.
Even with inflation and a public school with a great, history, that's like you said, I don't think you could find that anywhere. I have friends and family who are attorneys, and no matter their age, they're still paying back student debt to the tune of $100,000 or more, and it's kind of crippling people from moving on to different parts of their lives, and in terms of family and buying a house and things like that. So that's a very good point. And then so then that led you to obviously starting your law firm.
That's right.
So Mr. Mullin is and how did you meet, and how did
we met in civil liberties class? Okay. Not surprisingly.
There you go.
I met in Eric Neisser was a professor there at the time. We met in his class, and he was the best man at our wedding when we got married.
Wow.
Rutgers instilled in both of us a desire to make the world a better place. I was going to be a social worker, actually. And a guy who I was dating at the time at Montclair State said to me, well, if you want to change the world, why don't you go to law school? I'm taking the LSATs next Saturday. Why don't you take them with me? Well, I didn't come from a family of lawyers, and nobody in the trailer park was a lawyer. So I was like, sure, it sounded like a date. I had never heard of the LSAT in my life. So right. I went with him on a date. So he signed me up, and I took the LSAT, and I got into Columbia and Rutgers, but I couldn't afford Columbia, and Rutgers was the perfect fit. That's where we were inspired by people like Frank Askin, Arthur Kanoy, Anna Mae Shepard, Nadine Taub. These were people who were doing landmark cases, because at Rutgers, they had clinics where you did actual cases. So for instance, I worked on Right to Choose versus Byrne. while I was a law student, which
Wow.
established the principle that in New Jersey, women are entitled to make choices about their own bodies, their own medical care, and their own family status under the New Jersey Constitution. So we don't have to be as horrified by yesterday's appointment to the United States Supreme Court here in New Jersey.
Wow. That's interesting. So you got that hands-on approach while you were actually in law school.
Exactly, by people with great values who were concerned not with how much money can we make or what corporations can we work for, but how can we make this world a better place?
Very interesting. And then from that, was there, did you go straight into the law firm, or was there some little bit in between?
Now, my first job was I was a patient advocate at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. I worked for the Department of Human Services.
Okay.
Tried to advocate for better care for mentally ill patients in New Jersey. And then I joined a law firm ultimately called Ball, Hayden, Kiernan, Livingston, and Smith. If you saw the Chicago 7 movie that just came out, one of my partners worked on the Chicago 7 case. So that gives you kind of an idea where that law firm was at. I did workers' comp, but one of my very first clients when I became a lawyer who did law in courtrooms was a man named John Slahota. He worked for United Parcel Service, and he was terminated because he was involved in a relationship with a woman who he did not supervise while he was still legally married. He was separated and waiting for a divorce, but UPS claimed that although they didn't fire fornicators, they had the right to fire adulterers. And I litigated that case to 2 published opinions, one creating the right to privacy for employees. And I said it was marital status discrimination. And I'll never forget it. At one point, when we lost, we got thrown out by the initial judge. And my client came to meet with my partners. I was junior. I wasn't even a partner. And they said, we don't think that any court's going to side with an adulterer. We don't think that you should give us any money. Unusual for lawyers to say, please don't give us money. We don't think you should do this case. And John Slahota, who's still a friend to this day, 40 years later, said, I'm going with her. And he did, and we won. It was marital status discrimination.
Wow. So that probably set some precedents based on what you were saying for the outcome of that case.
2 published opinions, yeah. So I was just a baby. And when I argued we got thrown out a second time before we resolved it, same judge. And I was 9 months pregnant when I argued it. And we went outside, and a former federal judge represented UPS. And he looked at me and pointed to my belly and said, "Did you do that on purpose?"
Oh my God.
Yeah, I wanted to look motherly to argue about it.
Yeah, right. You planted it, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
So
That's a good story.
that was one of my first forays into the courtroom. And I just loved it. And I love fighting for a hardworking guy who he's still married. They got married once he got divorced. It was sort of such a weird puritanical view in light of the fact that we all know that you don't get separated and get divorced the next day. It was just odd for this company to be involved in such a private sphere. If if it was sexual harassment or he supervised her, it certainly would have been different.
Right.
Very odd case. And from there, we have done every kind of discrimination, race discrimination, disability, handicap, age. I argued the first pregnancy discrimination case in the New Jersey Supreme Court. We established in the late 80s the right of children who were HIV positive to go to public school. Horrible, horrible case out of Washington Township where a young boy and his sister were kept out of school because the young sister had HIV. He didn't have HIV. And it was brutal. The people in the township were so cruel. It reminded me of the faces, you see when they tried to integrate the colleges, and these angry, awful faces. So my client was 9 years old and he entered the 4th grade. His mom had died from AIDS. And his foster mother at the time, who was hoping to adopt him, told the truth in this small town that his sister was HIV positive. So a group got together and decided to form an organization called Save Our Schools. And they called all the local media. So there were lots of TV cameras. And it wasn't enough just to be in front of the TV and talk about how we don't want him. They went to the trouble to have him go into his classroom, have their kids go into the classroom, and when he sat down, walk out. They did
Wow.
that to a 9-year-old.
It's unbelievable.
So he's still a friend. He's a great guy. He's grown up.
And that was in the late 80s, you said, right?
Yeah. It was called Truax versus Washington Board of Education.
So by that time you were already at the Smith Mullin.
Yes, we were Smith Mullin. Yep, my husband is my law partner. Yep, we were at Smith Mullin by then. We worked together for 13 years on a case called Landano. We got an innocent man out of prison. It only took 13 years.
Oh, wow.
He was convicted of killing a cop. He was set up by the actual murderer. It was part of a motorcycle gang hit on a check cashing place in Newark. So it took 13 years up to the United States Supreme Court on that one, and up to the New Jersey Supreme Court as well, the appellate division twice. But we stood there. That was probably 1990, 1989, and watched them take the shackles off and take the handcuffs off and walk out. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Still
After
emotional.
so many years. Yeah. Seems
Yeah.
a big win.
Yep.
Fighting for 13 years straight.
Yep.
Amazing.
13 years straight. Yep.
I would have to, I don't want to guess. Is that the longest kind of case that you had outstanding? Because I know that they tend to go on and on through appellate courts and.
Yeah, well, I tried Slahota twice. We tried a case called Quinlan versus Curtis Wright, a sex discrimination twice. That was 9 years. They're separate cases, but I've been suing New Jersey Transit for 12 years now in various cases because they don't stop. So
Yes.
yeah, you have to be tenacious in my area of the law. I've been doing this.
So, yeah, do you think, yeah, it's good. It brings up a good point. I'm definitely not, my expertise is not in either doing this and podcasting or in law, believe it or not. But so I'm interested in terms of what you do compared to other expertise, probably that you know about from your colleagues. Does your specialty happen to take longer in these types of civil rights, or is that just the nature of the beast in terms of what you're doing?
No, civil rights and employment discrimination cases definitely are treated differently by the courts. There's a great book about it. It's called Unequal. It's a wonderful book, and it recounts from around the nation how civil rights and employment discrimination cases are treated differently by the courts. The courts come up with stuff that's nowhere in the legislation. They come up with defenses to corporate wrongdoing that the Chamber of Commerce thinks up, and the next thing you know, it's coming out of a judge's mouth. There's statistics about this. We're thrown out on motions to dismiss more. We're thrown out on summary judgment more. We file more appeals. It's why we haven't changed our country yet. Why discrimination, equal pay, race discrimination, sex discrimination, disability discrimination have been so intractable, because the courts in general, not always, but in general, have been our adversaries. And we have had to not only have the well-paid corporate law firm, there's one case we tried, there were 15 lawyers on the other side. There's always an army on the other side.
So in other words, it seems like what you're saying is that there's an additional level of pushback from the other side in terms of people, money, time, delaying when it comes to this type of law, because it changes the way that things might be done in the future. And there's a lot of people out there that don't want that to happen. Well,
that was beautiful.
based on what you said.
That was beautiful. I love that. And Amy Coney Barrett, our new Supreme Court justice, is a perfect example. She ruled that using the N-word in the workplace doesn't make it hostile for Black people. Imagine in 2020.
I was gonna say, when was that ruling?
A couple years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was followed. Somebody followed her last week. It was in the news last week because
Right.
somebody said they quoted her.
And I know you follow a lot of news locally and nationally and things like that. So you're up to speed on a lot of that stuff. And I want to get into that in a minute, or you can now. But I did have another question for you, just in terms of, you mentioned some of the previous cases. Are you usually going up against corporations, or is it usually government, or is it a pretty even split? Like, how should people think about, listeners and viewers that might know you or have read about your cases, or how should they think about that in terms of?
It's probably fairly even in the long term over the years. Lots and lots of corporations. I mean, one of the cases that got a lot of notoriety was I represented Gretchen Carlson when she sued Roger Ailes, and we got him thrown out of Fox News.
So what was that one? Can you tell us a little bit? I think that was a big one, right? They got, in terms of coverage, at least, and popularity. So can you walk us through that one?
Sure. Gretchen was subjected to, I don't know if you saw The Loudest Voice on Showtime, which was a little more accurate than the movie Bombshell, but Gretchen was the whistleblower at Fox News who complained about Roger Ailes, who we learned after we sued him was a 50-year serial predator against women, starting in the Mike Douglas show. A very, very, very powerful man. In fact, Trump commented on the lawsuit, favoring Roger Ailes and disparaging Gretchen Carlson, my client at the time. And one of the main things that we've been fighting since I've been a lawyer is access to the courts. There's a strong push in our country to prevent jury trials, even though your right to a jury trial is enshrined in the Constitution, in the 7th Amendment. It was actually one of the principles in the Declaration of Independence. But corporations came up with this idea that we can force our employees into secret corporate courts, forced arbitration, where a former federal judge or a former state judge, almost always a white man, he gets to decide your case. You don't get full discovery. The court rules don't apply. The rules of evidence don't apply. The law doesn't have to apply. And the law doesn't develop because you don't have precedent coming from new situations. And there's no appeal. So there's been this push to force employees and consumers, probably in every single thing everything you download, where they say you agree to these terms. When you buy a car, almost everything we do now, it's shoved in there that you've given up your 7th Amendment right to a jury trial. Well, in Gretchen's case, Roger Ailes loved to threaten to sue people, and he did sue people. So he wrote his arbitration agreement without including himself. So we were able to sue him personally and go to court. And we went to court in New Jersey because he had a house in New Jersey. And that allowed her, and the other thing, which is really important for people to know, in New York and New Jersey, although not in every state, it's perfectly legal to tape record conversations in which you're a party, whether the other party knows or not. It's called a one consent state.
I've heard of that.
Gretchen had tape recordings of Roger Ailes saying things like, you know, we should have had sex a long time ago and you'd be better and I'd be better and we'd be getting along better.
Wow.
And other things like that. I mean, the tape recordings are unbelievable. The other things that he said, I mean, name a form of discrimination. Horrible, horrible man. So we were able to bring the case in court. They immediately tried to get us into arbitration. But as soon as we filed, other women from literally around the world, two in Europe, but around this entire country started calling me up saying, I worked on Mike Douglas in 1967. Roger Ailes assaulted me. His entire career, these women started calling me up. It was heart-wrenching. For many of these women, they had never told anybody, even their families, their husbands, because women are made to feel that sexual abuse of us is our fault. It's a cultural thing. So I started asking those women, are you calling me because you want to tell this story? And luckily I learned about Gabe Sherman, who had written a book about Roger Ailes called The Loudest Voice in the Room. And I had read the book, of course, before I sued, because I wanted to learn everything I could before I sued one of the most powerful people in America. And he called me up the night we sued and said, we should talk. And I'm like, we should talk. He was at New York Magazine at the time. And he knew so much that he could vet the women without making them feel uncomfortable, like he didn't believe them, like some of the other reporters. Some of the other reporters, it sounded like skepticism, and I have some experience. I founded a child advocacy center in Newark called Winona's House for victims of childhood abuse. And we have learned through social science that if you ask a victim over and over and over again the same questions, it sounds like incredulity. It sounds like, I think you're a liar. And it shuts victims down. But Gabe was able to talk to these women, always with me on the phone, and say, you know, where was that office then in 1978? And they'd say, yeah, East 67th Street. And he knew that that was true because he wrote the book about Roger Ailes. So he had compassion, and his journalism, you know, he could make sure that he was feeling confident in these women's stories because he knew so much about Roger Ailes. So he started writing, you know, 6 new women came out, you know, 7 women. Now we're up to 20. In all, I think I heard from over 30 women from around the country. And Rupert Murdoch was put in a very difficult spot, and they fired Roger Ailes and settled with my client for many, many, many millions of dollars.
Wow. And that was in what year?
That was in 2016, July of 2016. 2 weeks after we filed the lawsuit, he was locked out of Fox News.
So that was a relatively quick one compared to what we were talking about earlier.
That was.
And a big one.
It was a big one. It was very exciting. It was around the clock. I had severed my hamstring playing football with a bunch of kids. And I was home, unable to move my leg. And my daughter had, one of my daughters had come to me and said, Mom, this is the time in your life when you're going to learn to meditate, and you're going to learn to be quiet and calm. And then he fired Gretchen, and we had to sue. And she would come over throwing her heads up. The house would be full of reporters and lawyers, and I'm on 6 phones at once. And she's like, you're just hopeless.
Was that, would you say like there was a jumping off point in terms of like your career and your law firm, or was it kind of just a slow buildup of, you know, obviously you're a successful attorney, and you've done a lot, and people probably already know that, but would you say there was one thing and then I want to ask you a little bit about what you're working on now, and talk about some other things, but just based on some of what you just described, going back to the 80s, that case, some of the other stuff, the 13-year case, and it seems like almost from the beginning you were involved in very high, you know, important, probably to you, from what I gather, each was as important as the next in a way, but there had to be something that clicked in terms of people are like calling you, your law firm, and looking more.
Well, the very first case, Slahota, literally my first day working as a lawyer in a law firm.
Yeah.
Met John Slahota, the marital status discrimination case against UPS. That got a lot of press, and it ultimately was a 2020, a magazine show. It was on 2020. It was a Love in the Workplace segment about my case And on the West Coast, a lawyer named Cliff Palevsky had sued Xerox or IBM, but one of them, because they had fired a woman because she was dating a man who worked for the other company. Like, so, and he won his case. Cliff and I ended up being incredibly close friends, and our kids are like cousins, but we met on 2020. So
Wow.
I was 26 years old and had these cases. Part of it was I didn't know anything, so
So
I
you didn't
wasn't
turn much
afraid.
down? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So you didn't turn much down and you were going after it? Is that kind of
Right, right. I didn't know enough to be afraid to take people on or to think that it says marital status discrimination, and that's marital status discrimination. And other people are like, what, are you crazy? You can't sue because he fired an adulterer. And I was like, why? But that's what the law says. So
So
I
kind of,
was,
yeah. So kind of from that point on, it sounds like it kind of just was a steady
was.
stream.
Yeah, I didn't have to worry about, maybe the people at the country club won't like me because
Yeah,
I
stuff like
certainly
that.
didn't belong to
I
the
was-
country
I was
club.
I was gonna ask you. I mean, it doesn't seem like from your personality that you worry about this. But are you ever concerned about any recourse after winning a case against someone that may have done something, terrible to somebody else, and you beat them in court, and won a case? Is that ever a concern of yours?
No.
You're obviously happy to win the case, right? So
Yeah.
might be the opposite, but
Yeah.
certain
No.
people have different motives and things like that, and it doesn't seem like that's something you're concerned about. But can you give us a little
Yeah,
take
I
on
mean, certainly Roger Ailes, we knew that he had a black ops operation. We knew this, and we knew that the smears would come hard and heavy. So we really upped our security. We started using, devices that were protected. Everything was protected. And they did. I mean, the New York Times printed Irina Briganti, who was still at Fox News, saying that I was an ambulance chaser. And Cliff Palevsky from California had the best line. Yeah, with a severed hamstring, no less. So, yeah, I mean, I have never really cared
Yeah.
if people don't like what I stand for, because I'm not a paid mouthpiece. I never take a case I don't believe in. I love my clients. Many of my clients, like John Slahota, I hear from every single Christmas. So I'm not afraid of people not liking me. I'm not afraid of judges not liking me.
Right.
I just want to fight for what's right, and then I can sleep at night.
Great. That's what I figured you were going to say, but I still had to ask. No, that's great to hear too. I think it would give a lot of people a lot of motivation hearing some of the stuff that you have to say. I want to ask you another question too, since you've been in business now and your current law firm for many administrations, both presidential, but even here in New Jersey, there's been a lot of turnover and political affiliation from a governor's standpoint. Has that impacted your business? I mean, and then from there, it kind of lends itself to something you already alluded to, which is like stuff like your open cases or previous cases with New Jersey Transit. Like, so the first question is, does it change anything? And then the second one is, as it relates to your cases, do you see that change versus the state or something like that based on what political party is in control or whatever you want to say of the state?
Well, Chris Christie changed the courts, and he said he was going to. In fact, I just wrote an article about it. He said he was going to change the courts, and he did change the courts. He violated principles that had been in effect since 1947 by failing to give tenure to two Supreme Court justices who had finished their 7 years, John Wallace, the only African-American on the court, and Helen Hones. They weren't in lockstep with his very pretty right-wing agenda for New Jersey, and he threw them off the court. And over the next 8 years, he put 4 people on a 7-member court. And he filled the trial bench with prosecutors who don't have a wealth of experience and corporate lawyers. So you won't find on the New Jersey bench public defenders, people who work for nonprofits, people who work in individual rights or civil rights. There are very few. So Christie,
still today, because of that, that's what you're describing.
yes, and unfortunately, one of the first things Governor Murphy did when he became governor was reappoint one of Chris Christie's appointments to the Supreme Court. And as I'm writing in this article, this is when the Democrats, in my view, bring a knife to a gunfight. They're saying, oh, we have to go back to the norms of everybody gets tenure. Well, you should do that, but you should do that after you fix the court back to where it was nonpartisan and balanced. So, in principles of judicial independence are really important. You can't pretend that it hasn't changed in 8 years. So that's one big difference with the Christie years. The other, Christie was one of the worst with dumping political appointees for various reasons, scandals or otherwise, in New Jersey Transit or other agencies. New Jersey Transit, shockingly, used to be one of the models in the entire country. It was a respected transit system that I think 900,000 people a day travel when we're not in a pandemic on New Jersey Transit. So the idea that you would just dump people who had no experience at all in an organization, give them $150,000, $200,000 a year and watch them dismantle it is shocking. So he was the worst. In my view, is Governor Murphy fixing it quickly enough? Not nearly. No. And the weird thing about our government is that we have an attorney general's office that goes to court and argues against laws that the governor who appointed the attorney general just signed. For instance, even in today's paper, there's an article about my partner, Neil Mullin, just settled one of the first equal pay cases under the new Diane Allen Equal Pay Act, which became effective in July of 2018. One of the best equal pay acts in the nation. Senator Loretta Weinberg worked on it for 10 years, literally. Governor Murphy signed it. It provides that your back pay goes back 6 years. So women who are not paid fairly, originally it went back to the beginning of the unequal pay, but you have to get things passed. So they agreed on 6 years. Governor Murphy signed it. The Attorney General's office went to court in our case and said, oh, the 6 years starts in 6 years. So here the Attorney General, we had a big gala and we had Lily Ledbetter came when I was at the signing of the new Diane Allen Equal Pay Act. And Murphy still to this day talks about how proud he is of the Equal Pay Act, and the Attorney General's in court saying, well, not really, wait 6 years.
Right, which is ironically would be after Murphy's second term if he has one.
He lost, by the way, we won. But
okay.
Still, it's so odd.
Yeah.
You stand there and you're in court and like, how can the government be arguing against a law that the other two branches of government agree on?
Can you educate us a little bit? You alluded to what happened, but on the New Jersey Supreme Court, in terms of what Christie did and not renewing tenure,
Yes.
and advocates that are looking for that to be lifetime appointments, I guess, similar to like the National Supreme Court or SCOTUS. Can you describe New Jersey's Supreme Court? Probably a lot of people, including myself, actually don't know the exact how it works.
Sure. There are 7 members on the New Jersey Supreme Court. It's in our 1947 Constitution. They are appointed for 7 years. And since 1947, every justice has been reappointed. Everyone has agreed that the 7 years is just an option to not reappoint if the justice is unethical, really something egregious happens. Some have been sort of forced not to seek reappointment because of their behavior. Venero, for instance, was criticized for racial profiling. Rivera Soto was caught up in an ethics dispute because he had cards printed up and tried to throw his weight around to protect his son. So, but they resigned. This was the first time since 1947 that a governor refused on political grounds, which is, the court is supposed to be political free,
Right.
politics free. On political grounds, he chose to replace 2 Supreme Court justices. Now, the Senate stood up to him, thank goodness, and they refused to confirm 2 of his appointments, and they refused to sit anybody in Justice Wallace's seat until his term would have expired. But in the end, he put on 4 justices and he tipped the balance of the court way, way, way to the right and very Republican. So.
Okay. Is there something going on in the courts related to, I know that they're looking to do 20 years of police records, history of police records. That's something I think actually the Attorney General himself said that was part of the plan. But there's obviously a lot of pushback on the amount of time and probably that. I mean, we're a very unionized state here, and that's probably not uncommon when it comes to police in general, but are you involved or knowledgeable about what's going on with that?
Yeah, we did the first racial profiling case. We filed the case against the Turnpike Authority so many years ago, I can't even remember what year, for racial profiling. We had a class action and the ACLU joined together with our lawsuit. But one of the and I have sued many police departments. One of the problems is that the Attorney General's guideline, his new guideline, which the unions are screaming about, doesn't begin to go far enough. It requires that the police who get a 5-day suspension or more serious discipline, that those records be made public. Almost no police officer gets any suspension. That's the problem. It's putting a Band-Aid on a gaping, bleeding femur. It's crazy.
So it was watered down to the 5-year suspension thing from what I had.
Yeah, it's crazy. I have sued many, many police departments and fought over internal affairs records. What we should have access to, I mean, these are people who work for the government. The taxpayers pay them and we give them guns. We should be able to see their disciplinary records and their citizen complaints. Really, citizen complaints is key. The Star Ledger did an amazing job of journalism on its force report, where it showed throughout this state, these police departments who keep abusive cops, who keep abusing people with their authority and their gun, and they stay on the force. And the force report by the Star Ledger really should have prompted much more than it has. I think the Black Lives Matter movement may push us even further, but I don't think the Attorney General's guidelines, but you're right, the union screams so much about moving this much. You can imagine if we really got citizen complaints like the force report uncovered, where you have one cop who has 20 citizen complaints in a matter of 4 years, and they're all found unfounded. 20 separate people were all wrong.
Right. That's interesting. And when was the force report released approximately?
I believe it was 2018. I think it was
for folks that want to go and look it up and find it.
Look it up. It's called The Force Report. It's an amazing series of in-depth Oprah and sources who were willing to talk. It's an amazing piece of journalism.
Okay, I'll definitely check it out, and I hopefully everyone else will too. Real quick, do you think we have strong media in New Jersey? Or have you seen that change? Just like as a quick question, hopefully. Has that changed over the years? I mean, you mentioned the Star Ledger and that great report, and it just popped into my head as in terms of like, there's been a lot of media consolidation in general.
Yeah.
So
it used to be that like the Landano case, the man we got out of prison after 13 years, It used to be that that story would get, I don't know, 20 paragraphs, however many inches that is. The Star Ledger used to be a newspaper you could settle down with on a Sunday and learn a lot. It definitely has changed. I don't think for the better, but that's the nature of the business now. The people there, I think we have great media and really dedicated professionals. And without journalists, we have nothing. We don't have a democracy without journalists.
That's kind of what my point was. And I think what you're saying, kind of getting to, maybe it's more like media individuals as well as the publication. So there's a lot of people like, on social media, and they're media personalities, and there's certain go-to people for different types of things. So maybe it's just really a change in the way things are. Obviously there is a change in the way the media has consolidated, but it just has changed from obviously from print to digital, and then from digital social media and stuff like that.
I think that it's adapting, so that we still have great journalism happening. It adapted slowly. And when you have a propaganda machine like Fox News out there, literally peddling false information every single day with an agenda, why it's not an illegal campaign contribution to Trump, the entire network is a mystery to me. But it's so hard. I don't think the media adapted very well to Fox, which blatantly lies every single day, and to Trump, who has put people on TV constantly. Now they're just starting to. There's actually an article today about how they're starting to push back, how journalists are starting to interrupt. But I mean, if you look at Kellyanne Conway, she was great at going on TV, and no matter what the question was, she'd do a 10-minute monologue. And if you tried to interrupt her, you'd be accused of being sexist. I mean, it's brilliant and horrible.
Right.
But I do think journalists are catching up to how we have to adapt to this changed environment.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of opened up a rabbit hole in terms of the media and how it could affect politics and vice versa, and how they feed off of each other. That's probably like a whole different show. I know we're probably running close on time. I wanted to ask you about, and you were talking a little bit about it. You started some of your state cases. So you brought New Jersey Transit. We actually met kind of, via email or whatever you want to call it, over a New Jersey Transit thing, where I'm a New Jersey Transit kind of advocate on the side. I take it every day to get to work. So obviously I wanted to get better for the state and for everyone, for the, without good public infrastructure, how can we have things, how can we support all the other good things that we have? So just I wrote an editorial about some suggestions, and you retweeted the editorial from the Record. It was in the Record, at northjersey.com. And then that was related to one of your cases, right? And something came about from that. Can you kind of explain what happened there?
I love the editorial. It was so thoughtful.
Thank you.
And I was really glad because it had, ideas about how to move forward, not just this really, really sucks, but these are the things that we have to put in place to move forward. So I retweeted it. I tweet regularly about New Jersey Transit, but New Jersey Transit went to court to get a gag order against me, saying that because we had a trial, which was then scheduled for November, now it's March because of the pandemic, that I was going to influence the jury pool. By tweeting an editorial. Yes, exactly. And I've been criticizing New Jersey Transit forever, but I don't say this witness is a liar or here's a deposition. Right. I talk generally about an agency that has definitely gone bad, and I'm very familiar with it. My first case against New Jersey Transit was in 2008 on behalf of 10 minority New Jersey Transit police officers who worked with a guy named Bober, was the chief of police. And when we finally got them to turn over his emails and his top lieutenant's emails, this might as well have been the KKK. The racism was disgusting. This was the chief of police who would not shake the hands of minority officers during promotion ceremonies in front of their families. He
Wow.
would refuse to shake their hands. A disgusting, disgusting case. So that case settled for close to $6 million. Shortly thereafter, a bunch of people from operations like procurement came to me, and we had 8 plaintiffs. And again, by then, we settled that in 2016. I think we filed it in 13 or 14. There was this totally entrenched white male, literally old boys club mentality at New Jersey Transit, where, for instance, I don't know whether you saw the guy who got caught, stealing over $2 million. He was sentenced to prison recently.
I read about that. Yeah.
My client blew the whistle about him, and her boss covered it up because he thought it made it look bad. So that was one of the things we uncovered. We uncovered, wives working from home who had no job duties. I mean, just a level of corruption and political cronyism. One of my client's bosses was a Republican mayor who went to all these fundraisers and kept his job no matter how incompetent. So we ended up settling that case for almost $4 million. And after paying almost $4 million, the individual defendant got a promotion and a raise and money to build out a whole new office space for himself. My client, one of the lead client in that case, got moved from One Penn Plaza, where she worked every day in a suit, 9 to 5, to a rat-infested warehouse in Kearney, where she had to be there at 6 a.m. I tried to get New Jersey Transit. I wrote to them and said, come on, don't make me sue you again. I beg you. I don't want to sue you. I don't want any more money. I want you to fix this agency. Can't you do something about this? And they wouldn't listen. They wouldn't change anything. So we sued a third time, and that's Pia Wilson's case. We got a court to issue an order to show cause, ordering New Jersey Transit to take Miss Wilson out of the warehouse. And then New Jersey Transit decided, because EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity, and HR, Human Resources, are part of the problem at New Jersey Transit. They see their job, in my experience, and certainly after the 2 cases we settled, I became very aware, their job is to protect the powers that be, the political cronies that got big jobs that they weren't qualified for. That's how, and to send the message to New Jersey Transit, don't complain, it won't work out well for you. So the retaliation against my client was just horrendous. Ultimately, she left. She left when she applied for the job that would have overseen positive train control, and they would not interview for the job. They left it open on purpose. All right, positive train control came about because of deaths on New Jersey Railroad.
Yeah, the
right?
Hoboken crash.
In Hoboken crash
Yeah.
would have been prevented with positive train control. A young mother was killed, and the HR and EEO and the powers that be at New Jersey Transit would rather not fill the job than give it to somebody who got a settlement against New Jersey Transit for race discrimination. So they left the job open September, October, November, December. Finally, she broke down and retired. She couldn't take it any longer. And they filled the job within weeks. So they would rather retaliate against a race discrimination victim who they admittedly had to pay, she and her co-plaintiffs had to pay millions of dollars, rather than give her the job she was the most qualified for by far. That's how sick it is over there.
I don't know the details of the case other than what you said. Just for listeners, the PTC deadline to meet is the end of this year. So in just 1 month, 2 months, if they don't meet that PTC deadline, then supposedly by federal regulations, they cannot operate on Amtrak's tracks. And they're one of the only mass transit systems in the country that have not met PTC's
Yep.
guidelines. So that's a concern in general in terms of PTC and meeting the deadline that I'm aware of. And very interesting case as well. And you mentioned the gag order as it related to the editorial. And then what did you do? Do you still have it doesn't seem like you have a gag order. I've seen a lot of tweets.
I don't have a gag order. They had to withdraw it once the press became aware of the gag order. It kind of doesn't sit well with the press for the government to be saying people can't talk. So it started to be in the press, and I think it was embarrassing to them.
The governor even commented on it. I think
That he thought it was he uses the word knucklehead a lot. I don't know if he used it in that situation.
Yeah, it's like, I was happy to see it go away. They should never have done it. That's not a direct quote, just in case was listening, but it was something along those lines.
Right. And again, this is the Attorney General's office paying a law firm to defend this. In 2017, I testified in front of the legislature with another lawyer who has done several New Jersey transit cases, Ravi Sadaraju. And he and I both sat in front of the legislature and said, please stop paying us money. Please, please fix this. Good employees are being forced out of this agency. It's so dysfunctional. We're losing talent and we're getting hacks. Please. And they all gather around each other. That same day that a bunch of people from New Jersey Transit testified, and under oath in front of the legislature, some of them lied. For instance, they said that you're entitled to a lawyer when you go to an interview with EEO. Totally false. I had the papers with me where they went to court and said you don't get a lawyer when you go to EEO at New Jersey Transit. So they really circle their wagons around one another and don't have any feeling of, wow, we have an important job here. Maybe we should listen to the critics. And you can see they don't listen to the critics. It's one of the criticisms that when commuters make complaints, it turns out they go nowhere and nobody ever answers them.
Right. I was just curious, like, since you've had a lot of involvement, it seems like over the years, the amount of fees that taxpayers might be paying for the side of obviously the government, because we pay for government services through our state taxes. That's just how it works. We don't determine the outcome of the cases, but we do pay for we do pay state taxes. So question is, like, is it to the tune of millions of dollars just with yourself and what you're saying is things that could have been avoided largely?
Totally. And they're billing extravaganzas. It's a billing extravaganza. In my recent case, in the Pia Wilson case, I have filed numerous papers where I put in the public file in court and say, these lawyers are billing this like crazy. For instance, there are 3 individual defendants in addition to one in New Jersey Transit, all represented by the same law firm. 4 separate summary judgment motions were filed, each about 6 inches high. I honestly, in 40 years, have never seen that. Normally, 1 summary judgment motion would be filed, and each of the 4 would lay out their facts. They have refused, prior to the pandemic, for years, since this case was filed in 2016, have refused to go to argue things in the telephone, which means we all have to drive to court. There are usually 3 to 4 people there and me. And it's a billing extravaganza. I don't know why the Attorney General lets it happen. It's a case that should have been settled immediately. They should have listened to me when I said, what are you doing putting her in a warehouse? You just paid $3.68 million to settle her case. What are you doing? Stop it. It's just intractable. I mean,
and it comes down to, like, what you were saying earlier, which is basically, I don't want to drag this out too long. The judges and those types of appointees, it's not something that, like, Governor Murphy could get a hold of and just drop, or maybe he could, but it's not really directly in his wheelhouse. I'm just trying to.
It's his AG. It's
Right.
his AG.
Right.
If I were the governor, I would be saying, why are we defending this? Why are we possibly defending taking a lead plaintiff in a race discrimination case. We paid almost $4 million to settle, and sending her to a rat-infested warehouse that the judge even found was improper.
So when it's scheduled to go to court in March, right? And
Yeah, March,
so
we're going to try the case.
I'm sure that one, regarding our media discussion, regardless of where it's at, I'm sure that'll get a lot of attention, considering what attention everybody gets, New Jersey Transit and everything related to it. So
It should, it's important. A lot of important things will come out.
Yep. So I think that was a great discussion, and I personally learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did that's listening. I really appreciate your time coming on the show. Do you want to leave us with anything in terms of, I think people probably know how to find you, and you've kind of laid out what your expertise is in terms of law.
Just thank you. I want to thank you. You know, this is the kind of new media that's sort of filling in the gaps. So I really, really appreciate it. Local politics in New Jersey, sometimes we get lost in the Philadelphia and the New York markets. So I think the more informed people are in New Jersey, the more robust our democracy, and the more we can have the best state possible. I love this state, but I think
I can tell, and I appreciate that, because I know you've done a ton of national stuff, and for you to just be willing to jump on, and talk to somebody on a podcast. It's not to make any money. It's just really to do what you just said, which is to educate other New Jerseyans, people that love New Jersey, on what are our challenges, there's people out there that are fighting for you, with you, alongside you, different opinions, things like that. And I think you just put that fully on display. And I had a great time talking to you virtually. Maybe we'll get to meet at some point, but hopefully you'll stay in touch, and we can talk in the future, maybe after the case or down the road.
Great. Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Thank you very much. Nancy Erika Smith from Smith Mullin. We appreciate it. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too.
All right.
Garden State Debate, where the talk is real. Garden State Debate, no joke, no frills. Garden State Debate is the talk of the town. Garden State Debate, for people all around. Yeah. Garden State Debate, Garden State Debate, Garden State Debate.